In the stillness of the night you walk down the winding road. You are increasingly growing more wary of your surroundings, certain that you should have reached your destination by now. Suddenly, you see a light just over the crest of a hill. Eagerly, you hurry towards it and are relieved to see a young woman sitting by a small fire. You approach and see her smiling, beckoning you closer. Upon reaching the fire, you try to speak, but suddenly you notice movement out of the corner of your eye. You watch in terror as a pack of white humanoid figures rush towards you. Your feeling of dismay grows stronger as the woman by the fire begins to undergo a transformation that reveals her to be another one of the beasts. A sinking feeling grows in your chest as you remember the warnings to avoid traveling these parts at night, but it is too late. The ghouls are upon you. What is a ghoul? A ghoul is a creature that appears from Arabic mythology. It is thought that ghouls have their roots in Mesopotamian religion and mythology because they have similar traits to gallu demons. It is thought that the connection comes from the nomads of Arabia interacting with the Mesopotamian civilization and trading stories. The gallu demons were known to be part of the underworld and were thought to carry their victims off to the land of the dead to devour them. Ghouls of Arabic mythology have very similar characteristics. Regardless of how the ghouls came to be in Arabic lore, it is known that much of what is known of these creatures comes from the work Arabian Nights. This series of stories provides an interesting perspective on these creatures and where they come from. Additionally, it is important to note that the translation of Arabian Nights by European authors wasn't entirely true to the nature of the stories that were recorded in the work. Because of this, ghouls were transformed in a way that led to many modern interpretations of the creature. The overlap of the two perspectives tends to agree that ghouls are humanoid creatures and tend to frequent areas that are largely abandoned by humans, like cemeteries. They were known to eat flesh and drink blood, though surprisingly the source of these things differs depending on which version of the legend you follow. Early Arabic ghouls. The earliest stories of the ghouls emerge from Arabic legend. The myth of the ghoul predates Islam, but because the ghoul is mentioned in the Quran, the creature is still a source of terror in Arabic culture today. There are several theories as to why the ghoul makes an appearance in the Quran. Some hypothesize that the widespread belief of jinn, creatures responsible for the genie myths that are thought to inhabit a parallel world, lead to the implementing of the ghouls in Islamic religion naturally. Others believe that early practitioners of Islam used stories that were familiar to their culture in order to convert people to their new beliefs. Regardless of how ghouls were introduced into Arabic lore, there are several key facts that remain prominent in the early ghoul legends. One of the most important facts that is covered by early ghoul mythology is that these creatures appear to be born of Iblis, the Islamic equivalent of Satan, which technically makes them jinn. Iblis was thought to be part of a race of creatures called jinn, creations of Allah who lived in a world that was set apart from ours. However, even though they were part of a different world, they were still capable of interacting with ours. It is thought that when Allah created man, Iblis became jealous that man was favored more than his kind and refused to bow before him. He would have been killed for his crime, but his life was spared by Allah until Judgment Day. Unfortunately, Iblis is using this time to take his vengeance on humans. This is likely why the creation of ghouls is credited to Iblis. After all, a creature who feeds on the flesh of humans and delights in their torture is a likely form of revenge from a fallen jinn. Ghouls of early Arabian lore were also known to dwell in deserted areas. People who traveled near cemeteries and abandoned buildings or through desert wastelands were warned to be especially vigilant against these creatures. They were thought to be bipedal, though with a hunched form, and were known to crawl, and sometimes run, on all four limbs like an animal. They were most fond of feeding on young children, presumably because of the ease with which they could be killed, but would feed off of any human they had the chance to cannibalize. Ghouls were also thought to have the ability to shapeshift. They could appear as beautiful women that preyed on lustful men by luring them to a secluded area, or as an animal in the desert like a hyena. They were known to stay in these forms until they had a chance to pounce on their victim and devour them. Ghouls were thought to be especially fond of preying upon travelers, solo travelers or small groups in particular. Some stories claim that they lit fires off of well-traveled paths so they could lure a single traveler into a trap and devour them. Another interesting feature of the ghouls of early legends is that they were not particularly associated with eating the dead. They were known to prefer fresh meat, and while they didn't turn down a corpse if there was no other available food source, they certainly preferred a live victim. They were also known to enjoy drinking blood and stealing coins. Early ghouls were also known to carry disease on their skin, which could have been because of the types of places they were thought to inhabit. Ghouls in European legends. Ghouls were largely unknown to Europe until Antoine Galland, a French writer, translated the 1001 Nights, also known as Arabian Nights. While the translation of the text was a wonderful venture into the rich Arabic culture, the texts were tainted because of Galland's loose interpretation of the texts. In fact, he is thought to have created several characters and added in stories that were not originally part of the work. One of these characters was Amina, a woman who enjoyed keeping company with ghouls inhabiting a graveyard instead of spending time with her new husband. This version of ghouls introduced the idea that the creatures frequented graveyards specifically to feast on the dead, which in turn had a large impact on how Europe grew to perceive the ghoul legend. The Arabian Nights text continued to grow in popularity across Europe and, in turn, inspired many stories of the ghoul that affected the modern-day interpretation of the creature. Some of the most famed writers of history were inspired by these legends and would eventually add their own perspective of the creature and its motivations. What do ghouls look like? The physical appearance of a ghoul is similar in both Arabic and European portrayals of the creature, though there are some noticeable differences that should be taken into account. Ghoul appearance according to early Arabic lore. In many early myths, there are descriptions of ghouls who are quite hairy. This is possibly because they are known to have canine features. Having an appearance that is similar to a dog, it would be natural to conclude that the rest of the creature's appearance would have been animal-like. There are also accounts of ghouls who would transform into other animals. While it was possible for a ghoul to transform into any type of animal, it seems that a popular choice was for it to transform into a hyena. The ghoul would use the form of the hyena to lure a person into the desert. When they were far enough away from civilization, the rest of the pack would appear and pounce upon the victim. They would then devour the victim quickly.